Welcome to the Uncommon Living Podcast. I'm Thomas Seager. I'm an associate professor in the School of Sustainable Engineering at Arizona State University and the CEO of Morozko Forge. In this episode, I'm going to introduce you to Frank Tortorici. He's a bodybuilder, a model, and a personal trainer. And his story is interesting because when he was a child, he was vaccine injured in a way that resulted in Tourette Syndrome. He's been struggling with that for decades. And he describes for me how the ice bath will at first, during the sympathetic activation, bring on more of his tics. And then after the parasympathetic dive reflex takes over, calm him down. Frank and I talk about nutrition, we talk a little bit about the politics of vaccines, and we talk about what it means to lead an uncommon life. Frank Tortorici, thanks for coming down to visit us on the Uncommon Living Podcast.
Thank you for having me. This is amazing.
Yeah, this is a pleasure. You've had me over to your house. I've had lunch at your house, like at least a couple of times, and you always feed me the most delicious, nutritious foods. You have a particular approach to cooking. Will you tell me a little bit about it?
Well, yeah, I really am an advocate of real food only, as you see what I serve you at my house. And putting protein and essential fatty acids is like the cornerstone, is what I like to kind of lean on when it comes to nutrition. And then, getting carbohydrates from, as served you a nice bowl of raspberries and blueberries, strawberries, things like that. But yeah, keeping things really simple. There's nothing in the house or in the pantry where there's any additives, words that you can't pronounce, right? Keeping it very simple, right? Basic. I think we get, I've been in the fitness industry since I'm like 13 years old, but I was certified through the American Council of Exercise since 1997, and I've been working with people for decades now. And I think that we tend to complicate nutrition, especially in my world, right? And in my world, the average trainer is not as well versed in what real nutrition is. I also have a background in functional nutrition, diagnostic nutrition. And it's like, everyone gets caught up in health from the outside, and I'm more concerned with health from the inside out. And when you start looking at the whole Hippocrates motto, food is medicine, let food be thy medicine, medicine be thy food, it starts to unravel a whole different picture of health and wellness for a person. So everything that I put out on my social media, everything that I preach to clients, everything that I give to you when you come to my home, that is how me and my family live. It's not an
I love it. I'll come back.
Perfect, anytime.
But I think a lot of people would say, well, that's fine for Frank, but to eat organic or to eat simple, I don't have the time to prepare meals. I don't have the time to research ingredients. I'm going to go to the grocery store and I'm going to grab the stuff that's already been done for me, because that eating basic and wholesome, that's a luxury. But my understanding is for you, it's not a luxury.
No, I was forced into this way of life. And what I mean by that, when I was 8 years old, my parents took me for a routine wellness visit. For those of the viewers that don't know what happens in a wellness visit, when you go to a pediatrician, that's when you're going to get your shots, your vaccines. And I received 3 in one day, and almost instantly on the spot, starting having seizures. Okay, and again, this is back in 1986, roughly, when I was around 8 years old. And at the time, we didn't have the information we have now, right? So my mom there with the doctor, they held me there for a little bit. The seizures started subsiding a little bit, but they were still somewhat present. Of course, the doctor's like, oh, Mrs. Tortorici, he'll be fine. Just let him go home and sleep it off, hydrate him, and he should be fine. It's the immune response. That's, you always hear that. Even nowadays, they run that. And so we go home, days pass, fever goes up and down a little bit. Seizures are still in and out, but nothing, they're happening, but not debilitating, if you will. But there are seizure-like things taking place. I'd say about, maybe a week after everything subsides, and then a week or so later, I played baseball a lot as a kid. I was a pitcher, and I'm on the mound, and all of a sudden, I'm just kind of short-circuiting. And the coach, they pull me over, Frank, what's going on? My mom, they're there, what, you okay? And I'm like, I can't stop this. It was just uncontrollable in my head, my eyes. After that, of course, not one, not two, but to 3 different types of doctors. And because I had multiple tics present, eyes, head, jerking, they're diagnosed with Tourette syndrome. And Tourette syndrome, a lot of people can have nervous tics, right? Like blinking of an eye or like clearing of the throat. There's a lot of those common things. But what classifies Tourette's is like when you have 3 or more that are present typically. And because I had 3 or more, there was the diagnosis. And the crazy thing is there's no Tourette's in my family. You know, when you go through my lineage, nothing like that. Believe it or not, my father was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis when he was in his 30s. Now he's retired now, but worked for the airline industry all his career. And of course there was flu shots and things like that brought into the hangar, and he did get that. And he claims to have noticed symptoms of the MS starting to take place just days after a flu shot, and then started having issues with his face drooping, his leg dragging. Again, he was working midnights, had a really rushed schedule. Working midnights during the day, he was doing his own business out of the house, fixing cars. So long story short, he was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. So it just begs the question in my lineage, is there something there that's susceptible to some of these compounds in these vaccines, right? You fast forward to today, we have so much knowledge now. I've educated myself so much on this topic because as I grew up, it was like, oh wow, like you start connecting the dots, right? You start talking to people. And you know, there's just a lot of things that are so taboo to ask questions on that it just blows my mind. Why are we not allowed to have this conversation? Why are we not allowed to ask of, like, say, thimerosal in the double multi-use vaccines? In the single-use vaccines, they're not using thimerosal because it's a one dosage, right? But they may be using other like sucrose or polysorbate 80, things like that to preserve them. But then when you have the multi-dose, you have the thimerosal. Well, it begs the question, is that breaking the blood-brain barrier and going into the brain tissue? Dr. Lawrence Palevsky, who we spoke off camera about, is a phenomenal pediatrician for the last 30 years that really is well-versed in this topic. I was just watching an interview with him recently, and he said something that was so like profound to me. He's like, it's one thing to listen to the doctors and we have the information and all that, but when a mother looks at you and says, you know, my child took that MMR vaccine, and right after they took that vaccine, my child wasn't making eye contact with me no more. They started like not responding, loud outbursts or banging their head. Like, I was like, when he said banging their head, Tom, before I had this episode with the Tourette's, pre that, I remember as a little kid, I would get on the floor and I would bang my head really hard out of nowhere. I remember we had like a countertop, you know, like the kitchen counter, like the edge. I went under it once. It was like flakeboard. I broke pieces of it off. I used to bang my head so much. And it's like, you know.
And this was after your vaccine injury?
This is pre
Before your vaccine injury.
But I had multiple vaccines leading up to that. Mm-hmm. This was like just spilled the cup over, if you will, at like 8 years old. But when you start hearing these stories from doctors who are actually questioning, taking inventory, and like trying to connect dots when they hear these stories from these parents, now at 46 years old, after all these years of really diving deep into the rabbit hole of this topic, it's like, holy shit, like this is what was going on. Like, and then when I talk to these parents of like, you know, it's heartbreaking. I'm a parent, and it's heartbreaking to know that a parent can go to a doctor and say, you know, my child's no longer communicating with anymore. Oh, they're fine. Like, it's just a coincidence. Like, you can't brush this off as a coincidence. The most infuriating thing for somebody that went through with what I went through, like even during the COVID years, you know, this whole thing, it's safe and effective. It's for everybody. It's for everybody, safe and effective. Like, how do you make a statement like that? A peanut isn't safe for everybody. Correct. The balls on the industry to push that narrative is so reckless to me, and it's so dangerous. It's no mystery as to why we're seeing the health of our society like rapidly decline. I talked to a friend who's a functional medicine doctor just a few weeks ago. You ready for this? In one day, he had 4 cases of cancer in people under the age of 40 or COVID, all COVID vaxxed and boosted. Coincidence? Maybe. But you know, I always rely on that line. I forgot which one. I think it was The Dark Knight, one of those Batman movies, that the Chief Gordon said to one of the detectives, "You're a detective now. You're not supposed to believe in coincidences anymore." And I always think of that line when we talk vaccines and you start talking to people and hearing this stuff. It's like, yeah, there's a lot of coincidences here happening. And I'm just willing to bet some money on it that if someone genuinely investigated this stuff, they could uncover some truths there if they wanted to. But, you know, when we talk FDA, we talk CDC, and we look back at the history, and here's the thing too. You know, again, this happened to me in 1986. What else happened in 1986? Ronald Reagan signed the National Vaccine Injury Act, where you can no longer sue these vaccine companies. Because why? Because in that time frame, 83, 84, 85, 86, what was happening? These companies were getting sued like crazy because people were reacting and getting sick and having negative reactions to this stuff. So the rumor has it that the story between Big Pharma and the Reagan administration was, we're not going to be able to produce these vaccines for anymore because we're going broke in court. You're going to have a major outbreak on your hands if you can't grant us some kind of immunity so we can keep producing these drugs. So now basically how it works, to my knowledge, every time a vaccine is administered, a percentage of some of the funding of that goes into this court. So now you can go and sue and present your case to the court to get some kind of reimbursement, but you can't sue the company directly. You're in business with ice baths, right? I mean, wouldn't that be amazing if no one could ever like sue you personally if something happened to them, like with your product?
Nothing that Morozko makes goes inside your body. I'm an engineer, not a medical doctor. And I think what's been lost, what's really been stolen from us, is the idea that the body already knows how to heal itself. What it needs is the stimulus and the environment and the nutrition and the energy to empower it to heal itself. So there are multiple levels of what's going on. There's the very high level, the policy level. You mentioned the immunity the pharmaceutical companies have from product liability. Then there's the physician level, the research that's going on at the NIH and the way that it informs clinicians. But at your level, the Uncommon Living podcast is about what can we do with our own lives so that we separate ourselves from the mainstream. The idea that what's common in the United States is to be sick and unhealthy and to have multiple chronic diseases that your physician says you're going to have to live with or medicate for the rest of your life. And that's not where you want to go. That's not where I want to go. And so if I can't steer policy, if I can't make legislation, what can I do to control my environment, my nutrition, my energy that keeps me living in an uncommon way? And I know that you've, through a lot of your own self-experimentation, found out what works for you and your immune system. Will you tell me more about it?
Absolutely. Look, to piggyback off of that uncommon, right? My wife, my son, I have a son who's just about to turn 7 this July, and it's like, that's what I'm trying to like really engrave into him, is like being a leader, being, he loves lions and tigers, and I try to explain to him, like, you look at like how they move in the wild, how they're methodical, how they, you could tell they think before they attack prey. It's like, you have to be willing to be uncommon, right? I think it's like David Goggins really drives that message home, right? Like being uncommon amongst common people, right? It's like, that's what you want. You want to stand out because the masses are walking straight into the slaughterhouse without asking questions. And that's another thing, as a father, that I try to really drive into my son. Always ask questions. Keep asking questions. I mean, as a little kid, he could ask a lot of questions. You're like, all right, enough. But I never want to stop that. I always want to keep encouraging that. Something like the school system, growing up, I was never encouraged to keep asking questions, right?
Richard Feynman has a great quote. I'd rather have questions that can't be answered than answers that can't be questioned. And it comes up for me, time and time again, as we're coming out of this period of scientific censorship.
And it's again, I go around everything that my headspace is like in being a father and being a high performance lifestyle coach to all my clients and to the people that follow my work. And it's like it feels good to be a black sheep nowadays, because when you look at, again, what's happening to people who are just following the status quo, there's nothing prideful, I should say, in being, 40 years old and being on cholesterol medication and high blood pressure medication and having to take Xanax to go to sleep. I mean, it's so common for people even in their 40s that are on at least 2 to 3 prescription drugs just for every ache and pain.
Right.
Why would you want that to be your common? Like that's what we're saying. Like when you're being uncommon from madness, hysteria. Like so being uncommon is the place of serenity in this madness right now.
Let's say you have a client with Tourette's. You've been living with your own Tourette's now for decades. You're a thoughtful guy. You've been running your own N=1 experiments. How would you advise your client with Tourette's so that they could minimize the interference of the symptoms that they have in their life?
Yeah, that's interesting. I've been working with a client with very severe Tourette's for the last like 15 months now.
How old?
27.
Okay.
Very severe Tourette's, like to the point where he collects disability. He can't really leave his home. Violent kind of Tourette's. And we've had a lot of ups and downs because it's hard, because when a person is caught in the web of big pharma taking their drugs, it counteracts things, right? Like, so one of the Tourette's medications, say like Ativan they give, right, to just calm people down. Well, one of the side effects of Ativan, if you look deep into it, are seizure-like symptoms, uncontrollable movements. It'll sedate you while it's in your system, but then as your brain's craving for more, now it can flare things up.
So you probably take more Ativan.
So I'm trying to help him counteract things like that, and we've had a lot of success. This poor kid went through, like what I went through. When I was 16 to 19 years old, I went through a very dark period of my life of self-medicating, because when I was a kid, they put me on Halidol, and it zooted me out to the point where I was like, I want no part of that. I knew it at like 9, by the time I was 9 years old, like I wanted no part of that. I suffered.
How did you know?
I just didn't like the way I felt.
Yep.
Like anything I saw in movies of like drug addicts and things like that were kind of like how I was feeling. Like a kid, I remember going to sit down at like my kitchen table and feeling like this angst, and like I couldn't sit still, and it just wasn't me. I'm a very calm, chill kind of personality, even as a kid, and I was like, whoa. So when I coach people like with Tourette's, I try to like get into their psyche, right? It's like this conversation of being uncommon, doing things that your doctors are not discussing with you. And what I try to tell people like that is you have nothing to lose, because there's not one medication that can cure Tourette's. Mm-hmm. Not one. There's none, right? So it's like, either way, you're going to deal with your Tourette's symptoms. My job is to help you try to figure out, how do we minimize it, right? 25, 30 years ago, I could not sit here with you right now comfortably. The tics would be very visible. I would be so in my head that I'd be like, look, I wouldn't know how to like formulate a sentence, because I'd be like, does he see me? Like, is he watching me right now? Does the camera girl see me? Oh my God, this is so embarrassing. Oh my God, like the mental chatter in my head would be off the charts, that I would not be able to conduct an interview like this. So it really comes down to like what I've learned over the years is like figuring out what works for you. And like we touched on before, to make this statement like everything is safe and effective for everybody, that's not the case with the human body. Most of my clients are blown away like when I have an intake call with them and I'm starting to ask them questions about their lifestyle, their health history, their family history. What does your day-to-day look like? How much sleep do you get? Like how much caffeine do you drink? And they're like, why aren't my doctor don't ask me these questions? And I'm like, you think that would be important before they put you on a life-altering drug? I'm just asking these questions so I could try to figure out maybe what foods to avoid, how much exercise you need, the intensity of the exercise, and your doctor's not asking that, putting you on stuff that could literally kill you. So for the person with Tourette's, I really try to get into the psyche to help them understand that portion of it. And then the other part, the big part, which segues in like cold therapy, with how it's changed my life. Again, like I go back to like David Goggins, right? Do something that sucks every single day of your life, right? What I've found, and like what I try to tell these clients with Tourette's, your Tourette's is always going to be there. My Tourette's is still always here. Typically, the rule of thumb is when you get Tourette's and you're diagnosed, most happens at childhood, a lot of times kids will outgrow it. But once you hit like 16, 17, if it's there, the data shows that like you're pretty much going to have this for the rest of your life. Now it just becomes a question of how committed are you to try to minimizing these symptoms, because they're going to be there. Like my tics are still there. You'll see it every now and then. Like, I'm very susceptible. Like if I don't sleep well, or allergies, stress can bring it on, things like that. So I got to get into the psyche. I gotta build a person's mindset up. And like how I try to give this analogy, it's like you have your Tourette brain here and you have your regular brain here. We have to compartmentalize it. So I had a conversation I just had with this client not too long ago. The Tourette's is here, but this brain is, how are we responding to our Tourette's? We're going to look at we're going to deal with the Tourette's no matter how you slice it and dice it. But how are we going to respond to it is the question, right? If we respond with anger and angst and all that, it's just like you're pouring more gasoline on that fire. But if we look at it like, okay, the Tourette's is there, cool. I understand it more. Like I can understand it. It's a monster, you know. It's like spiritual warfare, because Tourette's is like being raped in a sense. It's like you're being forced to do things against your own will. Like I don't want to snap my head when I snap it, but my brain is telling me to do it. So it's against my own will. So it makes a person feel violated at times, you know, especially on the bad days. You just feel exhausted, right? So we have to be able to like step outside of it and look at it from this brain and like, okay, how am I going to live with this? How am I going to respond to this? And the big question is, how sick and tired are you of being sick and tired? There are people that call me like with Tourette's or weight issues or depression, and they say that they're really sick and tired of it, but then when it gets down to like, hey, try eating this way. Let's start with a cold shower first. Oh, I could never do that. Oh, no. As soon as people tell me that, I'm like, it's not I can't help you.
You mentioned stress can exacerbate your symptoms, and the ice bath is one of the most stressful things you can do. You called me up maybe 3-4 years ago. You wanted to get an ice bath, and I didn't know anything about you. I didn't know anything about Tourette's. Morozko was still really new, and so you bought one. How does doing something stressful like the ice bath, now that you've been at this for over 3 years, how does that modulate your Tourette syndrome?
Well, it's funny. Like when I get into the tub, when you get that rush, I do feel my tics come on a little bit, and then once I settle in, it's like you know, like. And then when I get out, I feel like a new man. It's calming. You know, the best way I can describe it, living with Tourette's. It's especially me. Like one of my tics are like I hold my breath and I push it out at the same time. So I'm always like it's that, like when I'm doing stuff in the house, rushing, like if I'm driving somewhere, like that's a thing for me. So when I'm able to go in that ice bath, it's almost like punching a heavy bag as hard as I possibly can for a half an hour, and then when you're done, you just feel like and that's what the ice bath does for me. It gives me that release that I'm always looking for, and I need that release, like, you know, I at least every other day, just to keep like that feeling inside of like not feeling so on edge, you know. And then just the game changer of it all too that you introduced me to is the pre-cooling, pre-workout. Oh my God.
Tell me about how that's working for you.
It's just it's phenomenal. It's phenomenal. I mean, I've been doing that now for about, I think we're going on, this will be 18 months now, maybe, of the pre-cooling. And it's funny, I got, you know, look, we all have our soft spots. This past winter, I started doing it post-workout because I wanted to see.
Yeah.
And then also I was like, oh, these cold mornings, like first thing in the morning, like I'll do it after. Let my body warm up first. I'll wear a heavy sweatshirt workout, then I'll go in it. And that was pleasurable too. First of all, the difference that you feel in the endurance in your muscle from doing a pre-workout is night and day. Like anyone that's like because I have Tourette's, I can't do any pre-workout stuff. I can't have caffeine. I can't have any of that stuff. And I try to tell clients, like if you're relying on all those types of stimulants and you're afraid to like jump into like, you know, even for a minute into an ice bath, or just if you don't have one, turn your cold water on and get in the cold shower, then go into your workout, like you've got to try it. It's euphoric. The other thing I noticed, because I just started back now doing a pre-workout for about, I don't know, 2 months now, month and a half, I started noticing, because I wanted to pay attention. I started feeling a little softer in my midsection, and I really, and it's about 3 months ago, I did go for a full blood panel, and my total testosterone was at like 630. For a 46-year-old male, that's...
Every doctor would say you're fine, you're healthy, but I would say you can do better.
Yeah, and I want to. But when you look at like the guidelines, like I'm above normal, you know, and I feel great. And now that I'm doing it again pre-workout, I feel tighter again. Like my work, it's just the endurance you feel in your muscle. And then again, when you come out, like there's so many days where I'm like...
So let me get it right. You wanted to compare. You were doing the pre-workout. You read some of my articles. You're like, okay, this is amazing. Yeah. But then to finish the experiment, you start doing the ice bath after your workout. And that's when you started feeling a little soft and your testosterone came back 630?
Yeah. I started noticing that difference. Yeah, I don't know what the test levels dropped to when I was doing it post-workout, but then I had done the blood draw just before I started going into the post-workout ice bath. Okay. So I wanted to, because I was doing it hardcore pre-workout for a good like 14, 15 months.
Okay, so hardcore pre-workout, that's where you got to 630.
Correct.
Still seems like we can do better.
And I'm, you know, and I'm a person, I'm doing, you know, I was doing like Right now, I do a lot of fasting as well because I do believe in the whole hormone spike that way, the pituitary gland, testosterone. Right now, I really only eat one meal a day, so I fast every day. Like it's a way of life, intermittent fasting for me. That's been a game changer as well. But I do now. I've gotten into I made a commitment to myself as of November of last year. Every probably 3 or 4 months, I'm doing a 72-hour water fast. And there's a lot of cancer in my family, and that's one thing that I want to commit to that, and even more deeply, my spiritual practices. I have become very connected to the presence of Jesus Christ in my life over the last several years, and I noticed that when I fast, I'm able to hear God's voice clearer in my head. I really am. I've had some really deep realizations during my 72-hour water fast.
You're not
recently.
the only one.
Yeah.
I want to talk more about your family because you were saying sometimes you'll get frustrated with a client who says they want change, they just don't want to change anything. And you said, well, I can't really work with that person. But you can't just dismiss your dad.
Right.
Multiple sclerosis is an autoimmune disorder. And there's something like 17 FDA-approved drugs for it. None of them work as well as an ice bath. And I think, if I recall correctly, your dad won't get in.
He won't get in. I still try.
So what do you do?
I'm at a place in my life when it comes to say with him, I love him unconditionally. He's my father. And I want to I celebrate him for who he is. I can't force people to see things. I don't have all the answers. I always try to be open to new information too. There's times people reach out to me hey, you have Tourette's, you should try this, you should try that. And I don't let my ego get in the way. Well, I know this. I'm always a student first and foremost, right? I don't know anything is what I tell myself. I always want to be open to learning from you, from all these other great thinkers. I try to check my ego. You know what I mean? And all by any means necessary. So when it comes to people like him, I've tried. I've been living this way. God, June of 2000 is when I made the commitment to myself to no gluten, no pesticide-laden foods, as all organic as possible, cleansing, fat. It's been 25 years of my life that what I'm talking to you about is how I've lived. And in the first 15 to 20 years of that, I've tried with with him. And my mom is a better student. She's a better student. She's still, I would love for her to do more, but she's a better student. With him, he's just set in his ways, and I love him for who he is, and that's all I could really do. If he ever says, hey Frank, if he's like that, oh my God, I'll drop everything to explore these avenues with him. But when it comes to somebody who wants to pay me, as a client, I'm very big on, my business thrives on word of mouth and helping people, right? And I can't help you if you have, but I can't, and I can't, I may try, have a couple of conversations to see if I could break you a little bit I use the term brainwashing, I need to brainwash you, but in a good way, you know what I mean? We got to cleanse these old patterns, these old thoughts, these blockages. I can't. But if a person is just so I won't do that, what else can I do? Because there's no magic pill. There's no magic answer here. The magic is in what you're willing to commit to.
I decided I didn't want to be in the business of telling people what they should do.
Yeah.
So sometimes people say, well, Professor Seager, what are the contraindications to ice bath? Who should not do an ice bath? And I'll say the number one is you don't feel like doing it. And nobody likes doing it. Joe Rogan doesn't like doing it. I don't like doing it. You're not supposed to like doing it, but you want to do it. And there's a difference between enjoying it and wanting, because you want what's on the other side of it. So we get in. Joe says, I'll kill my inner bitch and I'll get into the water or whatever. And that's not exactly what happens to me. I try and imagine what it feels like when I get out. I say, well, I want those benefits. That's why I'm here.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to tell anybody else that they should or they shouldn't. And I wouldn't tell your dad. But I hope someday he's ready to try it and see if it works for him.
From your lips to God's ears. I hope so. I really hope so. I really do. But to piggyback off of that, I hate it. I literally, there's not one day that I'm about to go in that ice bath that I'm I like I have to, like, you gotta talk yourself into it. It's like it's this whole process, you know.
You and I both are at like 33 degrees, chunks of ice floating in the water.
I need to see ice.
Right.
I need to see ice. It's a ritual. It's a process. But that getting out, oh my God, you feel like you just, again, the euphoria, like, just, I can start my day now.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, and that's what I try to tell people too, like the spiritual essence of the ice bath. I notice that, again, because I'm doing it 4 or 5 days a week, it's a training of mine. You could, I'm sure, can elaborate this way better than I can scientifically, but how I can break it down is, I've found that through this practice, because when you get in that ice bath and everything in your mind and your body's like, get out, this is bad, like, and then when you find, like, okay, I got this. Now when I'm stressed out during day-to-day life, if there's a curveball thrown at me, or I get bad news, or like, I can feel like that other part of my brain that's like, all right, trauma, breathe.
Yep.
Breathe. You can breathe.
You're
like,
ready for it.
And you just like, you could say, but over here you're like, it's like it's like that two part of the brain almost, I feel like there's the anxiety of the stress of what's in front of you, then there's this part of the brain that's like, peace in the midst of chaos. Like, you're training your brain every day to do that. So that's what I tell people. Like, the ice bath to me, I always say, is like Mr. Miyagi to the Karate Kid. That's how I view it. I 100%, I tell every client that. Yeah. I really do. It helps me tremendously with dealing with life. And it's a practice that I just can never see going away, as much as it's...
Have you ever got your sister in the ice bath?
Not yet.
No?
Not yet, no.
Because she had a heck of a cancer scare.
She did, and she's doing amazing. She's recalibrating her whole life, career-wise and all that now, too. Ironically,
I think you better tell us a little bit about that, because she's an oncology nurse.
She works in oncology.
And at the time of her diagnosis, I remember you telling me she was morbidly obese.
Yeah, not morbidly.
Okay,
no,
but you were concerned about that.
Overweight.
Okay.
I mean, she's tiny. She's like 5'3", but she was about 145, 150.
Okay.
She was very inflamed.
She was too heavy. Yeah.
Not a lot of cellulite, just very inflamed and bloated, and just, the bags, the neck, like her lower stomach, abdomen was distended. Always has this like cough, like, you could tell, like there's this, our body's responding to things. And I remember.
What was her diagnosis?
It was breast cancer.
Okay.
Stage-wise, I think it was around stage 3, they said.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember, like, she came out to visit with her kids April of 23, and then in May of 23 she was diagnosed.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember when she was out here in April, I said to my mom, I don't like the way she looks.
You knew something was off.
She looks, even my wife, like
Yeah.
she just looks inflamed. Like, we just didn't like her hands. You could tell she was under chronic stress internally. And then sure enough, I think she was vacuuming and felt something, and then she's like, let me go. She was due to go, and boom, they found a growth there. So long story short, I mean, this is a girl who's worked in oncology and who comes from the conventional school of thinking of medicine, but not 100%. I mean, she believes in holistic stuff too at this time, but she just went down the rabbit hole now. So she did get a double mastectomy. And then, again, she worked in oncology, so she kind of had one foot in, one foot out. And it's the kind of thing, again, I just provided her with information that resources, like check this out, check that out. Then she went down the rabbit hole for herself. And what she did was she did the double mastectomy, but then she went down this whole other path with these functional medicine doctors where they did mistletoe drip. Mm-hmm. Which is very big. I only found out about mistletoe through her. I didn't even knew that existed. But
if I remember right, in Germany they prescribe it.
Yes. Before chemo, that's what's prescribed before. Correct. Mistletoe, infrared sauna, oxygen chambers, fasting.
So she's doing some metabolic things here, not just the regular chemo, which would be unusual for an oncology nurse to try.
Big time.
Tell me more.
And then, so she did opt. And this is the crazy part too, and I respect it. So she did all of her metabolic treatments and all of her holistic approaches. After she had the double mastectomy, went for her test. She was pretty much, her markers were good. She was pretty much like cancer-free, although they wouldn't say that. And then of course, well, because you had cancer in you, you should take some sort of chemo. And they were trying to prescribe this chemo that was very intense. Mm-hmm. Thank God she had the intuition to say, no, I'm not going to do that. Mm-hmm. What she did do, she did this like minor dose chemo with this functional medicine doctor that still administered her vitamin C drips, her glutathione and all that. So she never lost her hair, it was like very minute chemo, basically, is the best way to describe it. So here we are now, 2 years later, and she's, knock on wood,
Yeah.
she's cancer free.
Yeah.
She looks amazing.
Yeah.
She looks amazing. And she's had a whole she's invested in all this equipment now in her house. She has the hyperbaric chamber. She has the infrared sauna. Keep trying to get an ice bath. That's the one thing she's like, ooh, I don't know. And I'm like, well, just start at the shower. She lives in Connecticut. She lives in Connecticut. I'm like, you could take a pretty badass cold shower this time of year. So again, little by little, and again, when it comes to a family member like my dad, it's like what is that statement? When the student is ready, the teacher will present himself, right? Yeah. And in that situation, when it comes to holistic modalities, like if she's ready and whenever she has questions, I'm always there for her. And we've the silver lining in this whole cancer thing, even with her, it's brought us a lot closer together. Mm-hmm. My sister and I have had our as any brother and sister, had our ups and downs throughout our life. But this has definitely gave us this common ground, this connection in a sense.
Did she ever monitor her ketone levels?
She did, yes, big time. Yeah, I don't know all the details of that, but she went in. So here's the thing: she found the work of this doctor Nasha Winters, who's actually in Arizona. She's a functional medicine doctor, treats breast cancer through a ketogenic diet, basically. And that's one thing I forgot to mention. My sister was in full-blown ketosis throughout her whole treatment and all that too. And she still tries to follow some sort of ketosis through her day-to-day life, for sure. She had full-blown allergy, food sensitivity tests and all that. So she's very strict. She can't have a lot of things.
She's coming over to the Frank program.
Yeah. So she's eating very simple.
How about you in ketosis? Does ketosis modulate your Tourette's?
I've never played with that.
Maybe now that's the next N=1 experiment.
Yeah, I would be open to that. I'm sure I've probably hit ketosis at times with my diet. I've never monitored my blood. I've never monitored it.
Pee on a stick every once in a while. See what happens.
Yeah. I'm interested though, for sure.
I'd be curious to know. The N=1 experiment is the only thing that matters.
Okay.
The double-blind, placebo-controlled, gold standard medical clinical trial is a crock of hooey. It's a logical fallacy to try and take from the ensemble, this whole population and say, well, what applies on average applies to me as an individual. All you get out of those clinical trials are hypotheses. Now you've got to try it for yourself and say, does this work for me? Because whatever their P factor is irrelevant. You don't know if you're in the 99% or in the 1% until you try it for yourself.
Okay.
So, I'd be interested. If you go into keto, you probably are already metabolically flexible because you do such an ice bath program. Yeah. And the ice bath will almost instantly stimulate the production of endogenous ketones. So you're probably going in and out or on the edge of ketosis. Yeah. But buy some of those ketone strips, pee on a stick, see what's going on in there. And you're a very self-reflective kind of guy. Monitor whether you feel a change in symptoms of Tourette's, and then will you get back to me?
Absolutely.
That sounds great.
Absolutely, yeah.
What can people do if they are, with the popular image of Tourette's is maybe like you blurt out swear words or something. If they are experiencing the ensemble of symptoms that are Tourette's, what can they do that has been informed by your experience to try for their own N=1 experiment?
Relieving stress in your life. Exercise saved my life, right? When I was 13 years old, that's when I started working out. When I was 15, I did my first all-natural bodybuilding contest. I can't go, I have to do resistance training 4 to 5 days a week or I feel crazy, right? So that's a big one, getting that physical exertion out. Breathing, that's another thing. I always try to tell people, when I'm about to work with somebody, just do me a favor, let's take 10 deep breaths together. I want you to, and the look on so many people's faces is you could tell, most of us are just not even breathing throughout the day, right? I gotta go here, just to get that euphoric feeling, let you feel just the head, just everything just kind of relax. Again, we could live without water, we can live without food for a certain period of time, but oxygen, you're not gonna last too long without oxygen, right? So exercise, oxygenating your blood, your breath, really looking at your food, right? It's when I went down the rabbit hole of treating Tourette's holistically in June of 2000, I had met this doctor at the time. God, I forgot his name. I was in LA, and I remember I had such a bad day. My tics were really bad, and I had come home. At the time, I was pursuing an acting career, and I went on an audition, and I remember the tics were like really bothering me that day to where I couldn't even focus on anything. And I went home, and I just started like looking on the internet. And so this thing came up of ways to treat Tourette's holistically. And I met this doctor who ironically was from Washington, but was in LA at the time with his practice. And his whole thing was gluten. And this is, this is in 2000. This is when gluten really started becoming like a thing. And his whole philosophy was, whether you're allergic to gluten or not, if you have celiac or not, but he advised me go on a gluten-free diet for 2 weeks and then try putting it back in and see how your body responds. Well, I did that, and the day after I ate the gluten again, I could have went out and probably had like a 24-pack of beer, like rings, mucus, headache. I felt my ticking. Like I was like, whoa. I was like, oh my God.
So you don't do gluten anymore.
So I didn't
you don't need a diagnosis. You know what works for you.
I knew.
Yeah.
But what this doctor said that, and what I want to like drive home for anyone dealing, like say to your question, dealing with Tourette's, we need nutrients. So many of us are mineral deficient, nutrient deficient, even on like good, quote unquote, good diets, right? And now it goes into the gut health. How are you assimilating those nutrients, right? Is your body able to break it down? And when we look at gluten, there's a doctor by the name of Dr. Peter Gliden, and he has a great presentation. Anyone can find it on YouTube, how he talks about gluten being a long-chain amino acid, right? And even if a person does not have celiac disease, the villi in our intestines, which their job is once everything is broken down, it's like the octopus, sucking it in, spitting it out to the body, into the blood. If we're constantly eating long-chain amino acids, that villi is having a tough time eventually processing that because it's a long-chain amino acid, so it's got to keep pushing through, keep pushing through. His whole philosophy is if you're constantly eating gluten, whether you have celiac or not, there's a very good chance that you could become mineral and nutrient deficient because you're not able to absorb all the other.
So it's interfering with the operation of the gut in a way that complicates absorption of the minerals.
Correct.
Okay.
And when I saw that, I was like, wow, that makes a lot of sense when you look at it just as a long-chain amino acid. But then if you come to the other side of it here in America, gluten, wheat products, what are they loaded with? Glyphosate. Right?
Right.
Now we start getting into that. That's a neurotoxin.
A lot of people say it's not a gluten allergy. It's not a gluten issue.
Yeah.
It's a reaction to the glyphosate that is piggybacking with the gluten.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, how many people do I don't know about you, but like if I talk to people that go to Europe, they're in Italy, Greece, whatever, they're eating. I had a client recently. I went to, I was in Rome with his family for like 8 days. All they ate was bread and pasta, and guess what? They lost weight.
I spent 10 days in Europe, ate like a king, and lost 5 pounds.
Can you do that here in America? No.
Right.
No. So just from looking at that standpoint, that's what this is about. You want to be uncommon in a world where people are not looking at this stuff. This is your only body. It's the only one you're going to get. It's the only one you're going to get. And it's like, I always laugh to myself, like when I see, and it's not judgmental, but it's just the way of the world, right? It's like, you see the person who's maybe like 100 pounds overweight, driving in a, $200,000 car, detailed, waxed and everything and all that. And I'm like, I don't understand that.
They take better care of their car than they do of themselves. Yeah.
It's tragic to me. It's really tragic, I
want to go back to being a kid.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't want to be different, and for good reasons. This happens to men about my age. I'm 58, and almost every man is going to encounter some kind of prostate question eventually in his life. So it's hyperplasia, or it's an elevated PSA, so some kind of enlargement of their prostate, and there's an issue. The sequence, the cascade of medical events is you get a prostate exam, you get a PSA, then you get a biopsy, and then you got to evaluate whether the biopsy is cancer, and then maybe you get a prostatectomy. At any point, the man might feel like, well, that's not really for me. Like, I'm not doing any of that stuff. But all the family, the loved ones are like, but Dad, you should do everything you can. We don't want to lose you. Shouldn't you, just to be safe, shouldn't you go in there? And the men that I've talked to, they want to be different. They don't want to disappoint the people around them. They don't want to feel like they're going to be rejected by the ones that they want to love them. I think it's even worse for a kid. You come back from a well child visit sick, and now you've got a tic. I don't know how you go to school.
That was tough. Yeah, it was tough to the point that like by 10th grade, I ended up getting homeschooled because I couldn't take being in school anymore. And at the time too, my grandfather had just passed away. That was kind of like what spilt everything over for me. I lived in a 2-story home. My grandfather was like my second father. I was like this with him. So that threw me over the edge. But being a kid in school, I was always a good kid. I was raised, respect your elders, like do your homework. I never cut class. But when it came time to take tests, I couldn't focus. Because the whole thing, I'm like, oh God, are they looking at me? Like I couldn't pay attention. And that's the thing, till this day, my memorization skills are amazing. But if you give me a book to read, it's really hard for me to like comprehend what I'm reading if I can't memorize it, right? Because of the attention span. It's gotten so much better now because of the way I live my life. Now I can really read and remember. But at the time, it was tragic for me. It was really hard. But that's where, you know, I played soccer, but baseball was my thing. But I never forget when I was about 12 years old, I had an older cousin who did, I went to one of his bodybuilding contests. And when I went to that, I was like, wow. Like it really lit a fire in me of like, I guess with Tourette's, like it made me feel very alone, right? I was very social. I had a lot of friends. I wasn't like the nerdy, like quiet kid, but like I had this deep internal pain that like made me like, not as outgoing, if you will, like in a social setting, things like that. And when I saw that contest, that's what like lit my world on fire. That's when I started really getting into exercise to the point where like, after like 8 or 9 years of like so involved with baseball, I looked at my parents, I'm like, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to play anymore. You know, baseball camps, traveling, all-star teams, like they were like, what? Like, because it was my life. I was like, I don't want to do that anymore. And I just started exercising and exercising and exercising. Like I said, when I was 15, I did my first all-natural bodybuilding show. And when I was in
Was that competing against other teenagers?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. There wasn't many at that point.
Yeah.
You're not going to have that many. But then because I remember my first contest, there was no teenagers, but then they put me in the bantamweight with the men, and I came in second out of 3. I'd be like a third. But what it taught me was this discipline. I was in 9th grade. And I was waking up at 5 a.m. in the morning before school and going to do my cardio at the gym. Coming home, having, you know, my bodybuilding, my egg whites and my oatmeal and, you know, all that crap. Going to school, coming home, then going to do my weight training routine and doing my homework, any projects, any book reports. So at a very young age, I learned the concept of discipline. And I was, you know, the Tourette's forced me into it. But then the aspect of bodybuilding and fitness just put it on overdrive now. And that's what gave me the confidence. I mean, I went through a lot of dark periods in my life. A lot of depression, a lot of thoughts of checking out, if you will. I didn't love myself. There was a lot of pain. I didn't know how I was going to go on. I didn't know how I would live a normal life. You know?
You're not going to live a normal life.
Yeah.
That's not going to happen for you.
Yeah.
So you better be okay with the abnormal life.
I am.
Yeah.
I am. But I just remember like thinking to myself, like, how am I going to do this? You know? And again, yeah, like there were many nights of like, I want to die. Like, I just want to die. Like, how can I do this? Like, how do I do this to my parents? You know, like I come from a very close family. And then, you know, when I think of the years from like 16 to 19, just self-medicating myself, alcohol, ketamine, Xanax, ecstasy. Like I didn't want the pharmaceutical drugs, but this was the downside of being in the gym culture. All of my friends were much older than me, right? Like when I was 16 years old, I begged my mom and dad and they let me go. I went to Cancun on spring break with all my friends who were like 20. Well, lo and behold, like that's when I tried like my first hit of ecstasy at that time, 16 years old. And when I started feeling those feelings of euphoria and feeling like less concerned about what people thought of my Tourette's and how I felt the calmness, it was like, I got like an escape. Oh my God, you know? But I didn't feel like like when I was put on the Halidol, that felt like demonic. Whereas this was like euphoric. But then, you know, like anything, I was in the New York City nightlife, going out, these after-hour clubs, and you start doing it week after week, and then all of a sudden it starts having like the opposite effect. You start feeling worse again. You start feeling it, and that's when I had my moment of like, all right, this is not going to work.
Tell me about that moment.
Well, I had a couple of situations where I think that could have been it, like as far as like an overdose, you know, like I remember one night, the rock bottom night for me was, I remember I was out at some lounge in New York City, and I kind of was out of it, and I saw my grandfather walking by, who had been,
He'd already passed. Yeah.
and I just felt like this feeling of like levitating out of my body, and I was like, whoa. So when, after all that, I was like, my moment of like, this is not okay. Like this is not. And then the people I was hanging around were not people that, they weren't my friends.
Yeah.
It was I use the term as it was a chemical romance.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like we were all kind of like, and this is the one thing that like as a father I want to really drill home to my son of like how people come and go, and like, I look at like some of my clients' kids who are like 17, 16, 17, 18, my niece, and it's like, man, if I could just like inject this wisdom of like understanding of like what a friend really means, and like the probability of you even being in contact with these people when you hit my age is, it's pretty slim to none. Mm-hmm. It's slim to none, right? So
you're going to change your friends. You had this moment. What else did you decide to change?
Oh, just my I was raised Catholic, mm-hmm. and I went to Catholic school my whole life, and that pushed me further away from my connection with my Creator, mm-hmm. in a sense, mm-hmm. to where I wouldn't say I was an atheist, but I just went down like, I really went down the road of like Buddhism, meditation, like that's at the time. So in June of 2000 is when I moved into New York City, and I actually, a year or two prior to that, I was scouted. I was in the streets of New York walking around, and this fashion photographer came up to me like, oh, I'd love to shoot you. You got a good look, blah, blah, blah. He invited me. He was doing a casting for Hanes underwear. Mm-hmm. I went to that, ended up like booking a little print thing from that, and that's when I segued into all that. But he's from Taiwan. He was a practicing Buddhist, and he like gave me a book on Buddhism. Mm-hmm. So now at the time, I'm like changing the way that I eat, reading books on Buddhism and meditation, mm-hmm. and then just started getting more in touch with myself with writing. I started really like a big inspiration for me was the rapper Tupac Shakur, who was murdered. And why I was so in love with who he was as a person was because what you saw on camera wasn't who he was as a person, with everything that you see of interviews on him and people that knew him and loved him, mm-hmm. Was the poetic side. And it really inspired me to wanting to like get my emotions out, and hence I started writing. Like I have stacks of books in my house of just writing poetry.
Magnificent.
Just, there's a lot of dark stuff in there.
Yeah.
But I was able to throw it up and get it out, mm-hmm. right? And to me that was really like what shifted a lot in me. There was a lot of demons stored in here, as I think we all have if we don't want to ever face them. And to me, like, purifying my body through food, understanding the concept of like, meditation a little more, cutting off like all of the negative ties in my life, mm-hmm. and then just going there, like getting it out. It was very therapeutic,
mm-hmm.
So when people look at me, they always think of like the fitness guy, the food guy and all that, but like what's going on in
There's
here.
There's more in there, Frank.
What's going on in here is so much more important than than what we all see to our naked eye, right? For anybody. So that's why like now my work has really segued into a lot of mindset coaching with people, mm-hmm. too, because you can eat all the good foods you want, you can exercise all you want, but if we're in chaos in here with mm-hmm. how we view ourselves, with how we're seeing the world, and it's kind of hard, right, to find that balance in your life and that peace. Mm-hmm. And that's what this is all about, right? Like, how do we, at the end of the day, we're all striving for happiness, we're all striving for inner peace, we're all striving for fulfillment, to feel good about ourselves, right? And I think that's what it really comes down to. Like, we're a balance as men. We need to be balanced in our masculinity, but also our femininity too. Like, we have to be able to be vulnerable like this. Mm-hmm. Right? Like,
well, in front of this.
Yeah. I mean, when I'm 17 years old, you're not getting me to do this.
Right.
No.
But how's your son going to learn anything about how to live his life if he doesn't have access to the wisdom, the mistakes that you've made, the fears that you've had, how you dealt with the insecurities and the dark moments? You're just asking him to go and relive it, figure it out all by himself if you're unwilling to share.
No way.
There's your son. I have sons, and there's a whole America full of children that need the truth to figure out, what does it take to be a grown-up? What does it take to live my life?
Yeah.
And how do I get the courage to do what's right for me, even if all the institutions in my world are saying, oh, you should do this, you should do that, because I'm an instrument in whatever agenda they have in mind for the population.
Yeah.
I'm not into it anymore.
Yeah.
You know, I'm a teacher at ASU, and there's only some things that I'm allowed to bring into my classroom before someone gets offended. There's only some things that I can say into this camera before someone decides that I should be canceled.
Cancel him, right?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, it's, you know, being a father it's funny that we're segueing into this because I just finished, it's going through the final phase of the editing, but I just wrote an ebook, a 28-page ebook called Discipline Has No Days Off, I'm a Dad.
Yeah.
And I highlight on all there all of the things that I've learned that my wife and I have committed to as parents that we're keeping as like a foundational like parameter for our son at the age that he's at. Like, for example, every morning on the way to school, we go through, I have an affirmation board in his room that I had custom made that lights up. We do that every morning and every night. On the way to school, I have these things. What's an asset? And he tells me. What's a liability? What's integrity? What's discipline? What's loyalty? So I try to, like, I'm starting already to try, and you got to hear him. I have a video on Instagram where he's in the back seat, and I'm just, all right, dude, tell me, what's that? And he just fires them off. So it makes me feel so good, like, and I know my wife and I, like, when we see him doing things like that, because these are the things that I didn't have as a child, and these are the things that, like, I want him to start seeing. Like, you know how many times I'm in the ice bath and he comes over and he puts his hand, oh, Dad, that's cold, how do you do that? Breathe, son. You gotta breathe. And then when he's stressed out in life, I try to bring him to that. You know, when Daddy's in the ice bath, he's gone in the ice bath. He wanted to go in it one time. He stood up in it for like, 3 or 4 seconds, and then I pulled him right out.
Yeah.
You know? So, and that's like the concept of this book. Like, discipline has no days off. I'm a dad. Like, I cringe when I see the dads, like when we go out and they're like, we've gone to like, he loves Monster Jam, say, or we go to Monster Jam, and these dads are like just guzzling down beer after beer. And you can tell they're drunk in front of their son, and like, what kind of example are you setting? You know what I mean? So I was a disciplined person before being a dad, but now all the more, like, I really try to hold myself even more accountable because he's learning.
Before the Industrial Revolution, there would have been no need for a book, Discipline Has No Days Off. The cows aren't going to milk themselves, You got to go find what you're going to eat. The fish aren't going to jump into your net. People wouldn't have to have that lesson. But the Industrial Revolution brought in factory work. Your dad worked as an airline mechanic?
Inspector,
right? So everything in your dad's life has to revolve around the needs of the machine. It's not the other way around. It's not that the machine is there to serve him. He's there to serve the machine. And Henry Ford invents this idea of work-life balance. Because now you got to go to the factory. You have one life in the factory, and you have a different life at home. And, if you have a benevolent employer, then you spend all this time in the factory, so the time that you have at home is sort of okay.
Sure.
Work-life balance is an invented crock of hooey. There's no such thing as work and life. There is only life, and you must integrate your work into your life, because work-life balance was a concept invented by industrialists so they could exploit their workers, get them to make this trade, that when you are here at work, you're not really alive. Your job is to tend to my machines, and I will pay you, whatever it is, 25 cents a day, so that you can go have your life outside the boundaries of my factory wall. We have to unlearn the Industrial Revolution to figure out how to be human. And so you writing a book saying discipline has no days off is just going back to what we should have known, 150 years ago, our great-grandparents would have known, and now has been lost.
Yeah, we are living in that world of like lack of accountability, lack of self-accountability, that I always say that fast food mentality, instant gratification. There's a great interview of even Dana White talking about that, in the sense of like, if it's like if you could teach your kid to go out there and fucking go after what they want to go after, because this new generation is so soft, it's just this entitlement thing. Like, There's times like I would love to see my son, like even like on the baseball field, it would bring back a lot of childhood memories for me.
Sure.
I refuse to put him on team sports right now because every time you go look at these team sports, are they having fun? And I get it, they're kids. But like I've had him in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu since he's 4 years old.
Right.
So he's been in it for almost 3 years now. He goes twice a week and then he goes for private once a week. And to me, it's like, again, when I try to explain that to him, when there's a kid laying on you and you're trying to find a way to get out, son, that's life. That's life. That's what this is teaching you, life. Forget that, maybe one day someone's going to try to bully you and I want you to know how to protect yourself. But the discipline and the messaging that you're getting from this, there's no one saving you on that mat but you, right? And it's like, to me, those messages are so profound. Whereas, like I said, I have friends with kids and like, I've been to some of their games and the coaches, did you have fun? I'm like, they're kids, I get it. There's fun, but there's also like, if I'm going to invest the time as a parent and let him invest that time himself, there's got to be more coming out of that. And the message. Sure,
no coach at the end of the game says, did you learn how to compete today? Right, it's not the message that the parents want to hear.
Like why, this one client who's my age, he has 3 kids, 2 girls and a son. The one girl's in competitive gymnastics, and she's been having a lot of trouble lately. And I think she's 9 or 10, and he's getting frustrated because the coach is like, oh, she told me she's having fun. But he's like, if you're making me as a parent drive an hour all this way to go to a competition, and then you're worried about them having fun, why don't you just make them practice and have fun? Why are we in a competition then? So this mindset is just so warped, and that's really like society. Like these kids are getting trophies for finishing 5th place, not 1st place. And where in life is that going to help you?
It reminds me of The Coddling of the American Mind by Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukianoff, and what's happening in colleges with trigger warnings and trying to keep people from having their negative emotions. The disadvantage is that they never learn how to deal with negative emotions, and so they wind up sort of emotionally underdeveloped. And then you have to go to therapy and learn all the things that you've been shielded from learning as an adult instead of as an adolescent or a child.
Yeah, I wish I had that as a child. I'd rather like you said.
I don't know, Frank, you're getting into your ice bath. You understand the sacrifices you have to make in the short term.
And what we have to go through is what we have to go through, right? But like, it's like, everything that I had a great childhood as far as my family being raised. I love my parents. They're both still alive. They're great. I'm so close with the both of them. I had grandparents. But I just wish there was more of this conversation. The depth of life, like, but again, like most of us, when you're being raised from parents, a middle-class family, who their parents were products of the Great Depression, and like just work, come home, have dinner, go to bed, repeat, like to not have the stimulus of a deep, meaningful conversation like this of just life. Those are the things that I wish that I had as a kid. But I'm grateful that I didn't have it because it's made me aware to have them with my son and do that with my son.
Well, I'll say one more thing that'll get me canceled, and then I'll ask about what's coming up for you.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, 10 years old, Star Wars comes out, and it was, a cultural phenomenon. But what's Star Wars about? And you could say, well, it's kind of like a cowboys and Indians movie, but sci-fi, and it does have those sort of superficial trappings. But Star Wars is about the relationship between the son and the estranged father. And that is why Star Wars resonates so hard with American culture, to the point where it's become its own religion. They have conferences and rituals and things like that, because the relationship between the estranged father and the child in America has been in this slow motion crisis for my entire life. Darth Vader is the dark father, the distant father who goes to work in the factory where the children aren't allowed to go and nobody really knows what he's doing, and he's not even the boss. He reports to the emperor, who is evidently, like the chief shareholder or the chairman of the board or something like that. Star Wars tapped in to this cultural crisis of estranged dads, and it's only gotten worse. You go to any playground in America, and there's moms saying, be careful when the kid's swinging off the monkey bars, and there's dads saying, you can do it, son, It's the dad's role, the masculine role, to challenge the child. And we are now more dominated by the feminine role, which is to comfort the child, without a balance between the dads begin with challenge and then they follow on with comfort. Rub some dirt on that and get on to first base. But the mom starts with comfort and then would follow with challenge. There is no balance now in the way that our children are being raised. And we have metaphors for it. They're soft or they're coddled or whatever. It's because we have removed the dad energy from the raising of American children. That's my editorial. So when Alexander says, I want to be like you, Dad, I want to get into the ice bath, I want to give that a try, maybe your wife is saying, oh, we should be careful, and that's fine, that's her job. It is your job to say, you can do it, son. Come on in.
And that was such a beautiful moment, too. I wish we had it the first time he did that, because I was like, oh, you really want to do it? Yeah. Remember, I stood him up, had my back against his back.
You're right here with him.
Chest to chest. I'm like, all right, I want you to breathe with me. And feeling his chest going in and out against mine and mine going with his, And it was just a beautiful bonding experience. I'm like, all right, take three breaths. And as I lower you, I want you to slowly blow the air out. And then once you feel that, just come in, just coached him through it. And again, he was maybe 3 to 5 seconds. But when he came out, he's like, I did it, Dad.
Feeling of accomplishment.
And I was like, you did it. You did it.
You earned it.
You did it. And I always tell him, that's part of, I tell him, you can do anything. You just gotta focus. You gotta focus. You got the chops. And that's, I forgot who I saw this video on I follow a lot of the child development psychologist things on Instagram and all that. And one of the things that really resonated with me, that me and my wife were really aware of with him, I never tell him, you're so good at this. You're great. You're good. I always say, good work, man. You could probably try to improve. Let's work a little bit harder. So next time maybe you can correct. The ability, the psychologist was saying, when you tell a child, oh, you're great, that want to get better, just you're stomping that out in a sense. Whereas if you tell them great effort, you did great, good job, you improved from the last time. Let's see how we can improve even more now. It just creates that want even more to better themselves, rather than because he's a kid. Daddy, I'm the best at da-da-da. And I'm
right.
You're good, son. You're good. But let's keep Come on. Let's keep practicing now. Let's go. Come on, keep practicing. So just this whole psychological way of trying to get to his mind of getting him to grow more and grow more.
To build a resilient child, you would be better off praising effort than praising outcome. When you tell the child, when you make an identity statement for the child, oh, you're really smart, oh, you're really strong, oh, you're really fast. These identity statements are fragile. Now in the child's mind, they're wondering, what if I do something that disproves, that shows I'm not really smart or I'm not really strong? If I don't get the outcome, and then the child will often stop trying. Because there's a tremendous risk to the ego if they've identified with being something rather than doing something. And if instead you say, I see how hard you worked on that. I see how much better you've got because you practiced. Now this is something in the child's control. I can practice more. I can work hard. I get to choose to do that. And I won't be judged on the outcome, but on the process. And there's some good psychological research on how this builds resilience.
And I mean, no one's ever in a rush to come tell me how great I am, especially when I was a kid, right? So I think it kills this whole I need to be socially accepted. Are they going to tell me how great I am, right? It helps that I'm good with me, right? So I just it's funny you bring up Star Wars. It's I quote Yoda in my book, that quote, right? We must unlearn. That's what he was telling Luke in The Empire Strikes Back about becoming the Jedi. We have to unlearn everything we've known up until this point. And what he was telling was, you got to get rid of your disbeliefs. You have to become a clean slate in order to become a Jedi to harness the Force. And it's that's our job as a parent, right? We got to unlearn our crap, right? To not put it onto them.
Or we just wrap it up with a bow and hand it down to our kids to figure out.
And look, I'm not perfect. None of us are perfect. Our kids are going to get our good or bad.
Our children to see that.
Yeah, totally.
Tell me about what's next for Frank Tortorici. Where are you going to go? with
Wow.
this career you've got?
I mean, right now the focus is just to talk to as many people as I possibly can. I'm really excited with the current administration in America right now. Not that I'm some huge Trump supporter or political, but I like where RFK is at. I like the conversation that is mainstream now because of RFK. And because of that, I'm really just hitting the pavement, trying to share my story with as many people as possible of what happened to me as a child, what my line of work is to help as many people as I possibly can. The idea of like my own type of a talking platform podcast is not off the table. It's something that I really want to get into, and then just really unifying with like-minded people like yourself. You know, like I keep saying, ever since COVID, these are tribal times, and as a father, and like I just want to be around and in conversation and dialogue with so many people like that we have a lot of the same goals, same mission, because we can.
Yeah, I want to be on your
have to
team.
help one another.
Yep.
We have to help one another.
I want something from you, so I'm going to ask for it.
Sure.
And you know, maybe I won't get it, but I'm going to ask for it anyway. I want you to be working with your clients in such a way that they don't care who the president is. They don't care who's the director of health and human services. They don't care who's running the FDA. It doesn't matter who's in charge of the NIH, because none of those institutions or their leaders or their managers are really in charge of our health. They are at best tools, maybe they provide some affordances. But what I'm trying to do at Morozko is empower people to take charge, so that whomever the president is or whoever the Senate confirms, it's like some kind of rounding error on their lives, you know? And what I want from you is to do the same thing. To empower the people to take charge of their own solutions and their own experiments and find out what works for them without worrying about who's going to sue Pfizer.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, it's the one-on-one work is draining. I've been doing it a long time.
And it doesn't scale.
Yeah, it doesn't scale. And again, these are, because I always go back to, like, because I'm a father, I'm so concerned with the type of world that I'm leaving behind. And I want to know that, like, when the day I'm no longer here, I want that kid to know that, like, his dad did whatever he could to help try to pave the way for some kind of normalcy in his life. And I really am hyper-focused on using social media and all forms of media to do things like this and really start expanding, writing more and more speaking engagements, just as much as I can get in front of a camera and share my message. That's the ultimate goal, because I said one of the people that really inspired me was Tupac, and he had a statement: "I don't plan on changing the world, but I plan on sparking the brain of those that will." And it's just about planting seeds. And this younger generation, like as a dad, that's what I want to do. I want to plant those seeds.
All right, let's see what grows.
Let's do it.
Frank, I'm glad you're here.
Pleasure. Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you.